You're watching The Roach on Florida TV.
So let's talk about rigging the economy. Good segue. President Trump has been writing checks to the American people, several $1 trillion, and they're talking about more. This is not a Republican issue because the Democrats were writing checks to save the economy not that long ago. We're talking trillions and trillions of dollars. My question, Larry, where's this money coming from? Because I know we don't have it.
Right. We don't have the money, and the system was set up so the politicians can't just print money directly. They have to borrow the money. So only the Federal Reserve can print money directly. So that gave this independent entity, the Federal Reserve, control over the money supply, so the politicians wouldn't have it. So we're just borrowing money, and when the economy is at full employment, there's a crowding out effect. That if the Federal Reserve, if the Treasury, if the politicians take the money, then the money's not there for the private sector. But when you're at unemployment, when there's a lot of excess capacity in the economy, then it's fine initially for the government to go in and borrow this money temporarily. But at some point, they have to decide whether they're going to pay this money back, whether they're going to pay this back or not.
But it seems futile to me because we've been doing this for 30 years, raising the debt, printing treasury bills with money we don't have, borrowing it from China, borrowing it from Japan. How long can this last? I mean, can you do this forever? And if so, why doesn't every country do it? Even small countries, just print your money. Who cares?
Yeah, this is a problem, is that they get carried away, and they have politicians who are not professional economists who don't realize that there could be a sudden tipping point. So it's as long as the debt stays as not too large a percentage of the gross domestic product, of the production of the economy, then it's not too much of a problem. But if the debt keeps getting larger and larger and larger, at some point, people are going to get nervous and interest rates will start to rise. Now, if they rose slowly, we would catch on to that people were losing faith in the ability of the Fed to pay back the money. But unfortunately, the way our economy works, it's often all of a sudden there's a big lack of confidence, and that undermines the economy in an abrupt way that leads us to a sudden recession. And that's the real concern, is that we need to have better control over this, and we need to have the Federal Reserve have more direct control over this, and not have the federal government, the politicians, spending all of this money without paying for it.
Well, I thought I read the other day, Larry, that according to GDP, that now our debt has surpassed that, or is going to surpass that either in this next year or next couple years. Is that the tipping point? I mean, is that it?
Well, it's not clear where the tipping point is, Randy. We're going to have to wait and see. But the fundamental problem is there's too much money at the very top of the wealth pyramid. And the problem with that, I mean, you can say, well, great, these people worked hard, they were ingenious, but the problem is it's creating a fundamental problem of causing the interest rates to be really low. When you have that much money in the financial markets, it's hard to find somebody that wants to borrow your money and pay you a lot of money for it, because there's tons of money up there. But it's owned by the 10% wealthiest people who own almost 90% of the stock market. And so that money has been piling up there. But the interesting thing is that with poor people and middle-class people, the absolute value of money is really important. I got to pay my bills. I got to, have clothes for the kids. We got to have food. But as you get wealthier and wealthier, it's not the absolute amount of money. It's the relative amount of money you have. And because you start thinking that money means that you're worth more, that you're a more valuable person in some sense. Because I've got more money, it must mean something good about me. So then it's really where you fall in the Forbes list of wealthiest people. What that means is you can tax the wealthiest people as long as you tax them in a way that is even Steven across the wealthy people, that you're not giving one wealthy person an advantage over another wealthy person. And as long as you do it even Steven, they just care. There's been psychological studies showing that they will not reduce their incentive to work hard and to do various things, as long as they're not being cheated in terms of the ranking. That's what they're really concerned about.
So the fact that this particular administration has been writing checks, it doesn't bother you? You're not worried about it? They should be doing it then?
Well, I think right now they have to do it in order to restore the economy. What bothers me is that the politicians are doing it instead of the professional economists in the Federal Reserve. So like the Federal Reserve office in Washington has 400 PhD economists that study all of this and use all sorts of involved econometric equations to calculate what's going on. But the Federal Reserve doesn't have the tools they need to directly work with Main Street, as I've mentioned.
Right.
And so they really need to incorporate these new tools, specifically these My America Prosperity accounts, these individual smartphone accounts, which you can use to smartphone transfer. Somebody rakes your leaves or cuts your grass, you can transfer the money from one to the other. Your employer could pay you through your Federal Reserve account. And it's a very secure account. So there's some very high-tech blockchain methods of making sure these accounts are extremely secure. But the main thing is enable the Fed to work directly with the people and not have to go through these financial markets to control the money flow in the economy.
So you're good on them writing the checks. They've got it. The people need to pay their rent, their gas bills. How about when we go back to 2008 and we were bailing out the banks and the car companies? Was that a good check writing system at that point too, or bad?
Well, under the circumstances, it was a necessary evil, but I think too many of these banks got away with some shenanigans, and they got into some very risky situations, and of course the whole too big to fail thing. And so there was where there should have been a moral hazard problem, where we should have fixed the moral hazard problem and made these people fully pay for what they did. Instead, we kind of let them off for free, get out of jail free, sort of like Monopoly, right? So, yeah, it was not a good situation. It was handled reasonably well, but we didn't really fully make the people face up to what they had done and not do it again. So we really need to break up a lot of these companies. And one of these, there's a great book called The Myth of Capitalism by Jonathan Tepper that should have been called The Myth of Competition, because what he shows is there's tremendous concentration in all sorts of markets you wouldn't expect, like the beer market. You would think, there's all these brews, you can brew your own beer. But in reality, the vast majority of beer that people drink is two companies. Only two companies control it. And eyeglasses, you'd think, wait a minute, it's just some plastic and some glass, and they're charging.
I know about that one.
Cents, and now they're charging $95 or something.
Yeah.
It's crazy. It's because there's only two companies that control this eyeglass market. And it's really dominant throughout our economy, where there used to be a lot of competition. A lot of the competition has been destroyed, and the government is responsible for allowing this to happen. It's very unfortunate.
Yeah, and listen, I know so little about the economy and how it all works. I only know what I see. So I get real bothered by this spending and this debt, and I never seem to get an answer on it. And every time a new administration comes along, it's more spending. And, this nonsense that Republicans are conservative, that is such baloney, and the Democrats are spending. I just don't get it. To me, it's basic math. You can't spend more than you earn, but somehow every administration continues this insanity, and I just think it's the biggest thing threatening our country. Forget about Al Qaeda. I'm worried about the banks collapsing and the dollar collapsing.
Well, the fundamental problem, Randy, is that the rich people, and I hate to say it, my father was a Wall Street banker, so I didn't come from a poor family.
Yeah, let's blame Dad. Come on, let's get him.
They have too much. Now, in my day, the Eastern elite was very cautious. They didn't get involved in politics, and they didn't get their name in the news, and they kept their salary modest because they believed in in making sure that there was no French Revolution or no, revolt against the people. So they had what they call noblesse oblige, where you had an obligation. So it was like upstairs, downstairs, Downton Abbey. You had an obligation to the other people, the lesser people, they might call them, but they didn't try to crush the lesser people. Now, I'm not saying that they're trying to do it now, but around 1960, there was this transition from what was really an aristocracy. The United States remember, women couldn't even vote until 1920.
I know.
And you had to own property to vote. And in order to get into Harvard, Yale, Princeton, Notre Dame, you had to have legacy. You had to have...
Right, come from a family of well-to-do, sure.
Exactly. So that was replicating itself. But the people who involved in that they felt guilty because they knew they weren't the smartest or necessarily the best, but they were controlling everything. Whereas then when we started using SAT scores and ACT scores and shifted from the aristocracy to the meritocracy, we thought, oh, everything's going to be great now. But as it turned out, it got even worse because the people in the meritocracy who were really smart, these really smart lawyers and bankers and so forth, they could outsmart the government lawyers who weren't being paid very much, and they could rig the system to themselves, and they would make sure their kids had the best possible education and went to the best possible schools. And so the meritocracy started replicating itself even worse than the old aristocracy. And so instead of having the American dream where you can anybody can just pull themselves up by their bootstraps, what the scientists have found when they do the study is that it's very difficult for people who come from a family where the parents have low education and have very poor to rise up above that level. And the people who are born to very wealthy family tend to stay there. And we are one of the worst countries among the wealthy countries in terms of this upward mobility. We have very poor upward mobility. So that's a very serious problem we need to address. And one way to address it and to get more of this money out of Wall Street is through estate taxes and inheritance taxes. And there's been Bill Gates and Warren Buffett who say, I'm not going to give huge amounts of money to my kid. I'll give them a basic amount, but they're going to have to learn to earn money on their own, just like everybody else. So there's some people that understand the problem and are trying to deal with it. And that's where the money would come from to pay for infrastructure. You can see in China, they're investing all sorts of money into their education of their people, into their infrastructures, into the research. We need to do the same. But we haven't been doing that because of this debt problem, this federal debt problem. So we've got to get the money from somewhere. And these wealthiest people are really where the money needs to come from, unfortunately.
No more Roach on Florida TV.